Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm very excited to join the Times Higher Education Leadership and Management Summit to discuss the theme of creating resilience in a certain time. My name is Alexandros Papaspiridis, and I'm heading the higher education activities across Asia Pacific, Japan. And today we're going to have a very interesting session to go through. Let's provide some context about the use of data in higher education before COVID-19, and referring by some studies that look at education comparable to other fields. Starting from a 2017 study by McKinsey, which really put education in the back of the sectors adopting it. And the key reason being that education has low digital adoption. But I want to focus a little bit on the study which we did last year with IDC, which we evaluated 6 dimensions. And when we compared education to other sectors, we found that education was lagging in 3 dimensions: on data, strategy, and investment. And I would like to focus on 2, the data and culture. So regarding data is a key issue for institutions, but it's often siloed. So educational institutions make limited usage of cloud platforms, so it prevents universities to have a scalability of the solution. Also, universities face issues with data timeliness and quality and a lack of governance practices in order to ensure that their data is trustworthy. Then looking about culture, more than half of the education staff and 2/3 actually of the education staff and half of the education leaders do not agree that staff are empowered to take risks and act with speed and agility within the institution. When COVID-19 struck, educational leaders and faculty members rushed to maintain academic continuity in a matter of days. Our CEO put it clearly that this has been a huge acceleration in digital transformation. Kudos to all of you, whether you're a leader or a faculty member. We see the evolution of 3 phases in dealing with the crisis. How do you become resilient in times of unprecedented uncertainty? As we navigate the response, recovery, and reimagine phases, we all have a collective opportunity as well as a collective responsibility to define what comes next. We know it won't be business as usual. We will need to develop an acute sense of what should be rebuilt, what should be reimagined, and what should be left behind. With that, I would like to close my introduction about the role of data in driving agility in higher ed institutions. Higher ed institutions have sizes and complexity comparable to large enterprises and have been hit very hard from the effect of COVID. And to succeed, they need to adopt best practices from successful enterprises. Reimagining higher education has to be based on data-driven strategies. To discuss this further, I'm privileged to be joined by 2 great colleagues who are bringing unique insights. Kate Carruthers is the Chief Data Insights Officer for UNSW Sydney. Kate has extensive experience in senior roles in ICT across both public and private sector, and she's a member of New South Wales Government Data Analytics Advisory Board. Professor Dr. Friedrich Hesse has received his PhD from the University of Aachen and qualified as Professor of Psychology at the University of Göttingen. He has a long distinguished academic career in Germany and the US. From 1990, Friedrich has been a professor in Tübingen, and since 2018 has been Executive Committee Officer of the Leibniz Association. And in this capacity, he's the scientific co-chair of the Global Learning Council. Kate, Friedrich, welcome. Kate, please tell us, what is your role as Chief Data and Insights Officer?
So I have a broad responsibility across the university for data, to manage it as an asset, to ensure that we have proper policies, procedures, and guidelines for its use, and also to develop data strategies so that we can use data and obtain insights from our data.
What data should a university be consolidating, and why?
Well, so There's really three parts of a university. So there's the part where we teach students. So learning and teaching are a big part of what we do. There's the administration or the running of the university as a business, which is every university must do. And then there's the third part, which is research, which can be anything, any kind, as you well know, any kind of data that you can imagine a university holds. So there's different ways that we need to approach all three of those realms. And in particular, I think we need to improve the way that we use the data for administration and for learning and teaching.
I've read in one of your articles about the democratization of business intelligence. Can you give us some context on what is this and what's the approach that you are taking at UNSW?
Yeah, democratization of data is something that I'm a huge fan of. So one of the important things that we're trying to do with our data strategy is get from data to insight faster and get the insights into the hands of the people who need the insights as fast as possible. And also to get those insights into their hands without them having to ask for it. And so that they can help themselves to the data, and that they can also use the data to inform their own decision making. So we're trying to build a culture of data-driven decision making at the university. So a big part of that has been empowering the ordinary frontline staff who might not have any great expertise with data, but who might be able to learn to use Power BI to provide curated data sets that they can use safely, and to understand what those data sets mean, and then to derive their own insights from it.
We saw earlier about scenario planning. What is the role of data in this scenario planning?
Well, if you're doing scenario planning without data, then you might be making some erroneous decisions. So it's important to have it and to understand what it means. So having data without understanding it is problematic. And in a lot of organizations, they really don't have a deep understanding of their data, and they don't have a business unit that is tasked with making sure that it joins the dots so that the data can be turned into information and insights. Because data on its own is just an asset that's not working for you unless you turn it into information and insights.
Thanks, Kate. Frederick, tell us a few words about Global Learning Council.
Yeah, the Global Learning Network is a network or a group of, we call it thought leaders on digital education, which is something different from just being together with your colleagues in a science area where you have a conference on learning or whatever. It's more towards those people responsible for guiding a whole university or a whole big educational company or whatever. And we are interested in having global dialogues on more or less strategic perspectives, how to do digital education or digital education transformation. And in the time before COVID, we had these big conferences at different continents. So we started in Pittsburgh, we had one in Singapore, one in Berlin, and we were just planning to have one in Africa, East Africa, in Nairobi, March of this year. But everybody knows March of this year was not the best time. So even in our own Global Learning Council, we had to change the way of interacting and doing our business, of bringing together thought leaders in digital education. So we had some other means to meet on the digital base, and we did run a quite interesting survey with this thought leader group.
Can you give us a sneak peek to this survey, Friedrich?
Yeah, actually, we tried and we were successful in having feedback and answers to our survey from more or less all over the world. We had people from Asia, from Europe, from America, and from Africa. And we only asked this, I mentioned, thought leader persons who were responsible for bigger institutions, bigger associations with respect to higher education and university education. And 80% of them indicated that the biggest challenge was in transitioning to a remote learning in this pandemic situation by having a lack of expertise among their teachers, their instructors. And second, they were referring to the main response in higher education as a need to train instructors how to teach in a digital classroom, which is a very general topic. And you introduced myself as someone being a learning scientist too. And I know there's one nice word, it's TPEC, and it stands for technology, pedagogy, and content. And we know all these three perspectives had to be brought together. But I guess from the survey, most were referring to the technical demands coming up, not to the same degree. This is coming up right now, that the pedagogy has to fit with the technology. Because of the pandemic, higher education institutions are finally catching up on something that was previously, and that's the interesting thing, quite often neglected, the teaching experience. And so things coming to bear right now, more than ever before, is that they want to see the value of good teaching in with respect, how can we measure the quality of good teaching and the impact of good teaching in a more or less or more becoming competitive environment of higher education, and a strong interest to be based, and this is quite in line what you said before and what Kate has been said, to real data from research which could be used to improve practice and having good guidelines for digital teaching right now. This is coming up. So the COVID situation is really bringing to bear good teaching as a key performance indicator much, much more than ever before.
That's a great insight. Kate, I would like your comment on that. How do you see here is the survey of the leaders from the GLC says that we need to have data to evaluate the online teaching, and we understand where we are. I would like your comment on that, and if there's any efforts which you're aware on this area.
It's a really interesting area. Evaluating teaching has been problematic forever. And there's been some early initiatives in the UK for evaluating teaching. And I think having common criteria for evaluating teaching separate to students' own opinions of the teaching, because we know that there is a great deal of bias in student evaluations of teachers. So having it purely assessed from student perspective, not from the teaching perspective, is going to be really important. We in the Australian higher education sector largely evaluate teaching in mostly ineffective and inefficient ways, and we rely on the student feedback. And I think that's kind of an imperfect way to do it, and we do need to do better.
Thank you, and I'm glad that you're calling out that student surveys are very incomplete tool to do that. Can you comment a little bit about how COVID played a role in shaping the university response, and how data fit in this picture about how you are preparing on the response?
In Australia, we've been surprised by how hard it was to identify which students were on and offshore, because we hadn't ever had to care about that before. You know, who's in the country and who's not. And that was a really surprising thing for us, because we'd never needed to know that before. So we just knew that by the first day of term, all the students would be in class. That's how things worked. And so in COVID, it's put different pressures on the universities, and it's exposed gaps in the data that we have and the focuses that we have. So, you know, it's shifted what we do. And then there's of course, the COVID scientific response that we've had to marshal. So we've actually had to make sure that that data is secure and things like that too. So there's been, you know, the learning and teaching side of things, the administrative side of things, and the research side of things. We've all had to respond in different ways. And there's been a lot of in the media about different state actors seeking access to some of the COVID-related research data. So it's been an interesting series of new experiences for us.
I would like to come back to this point with some insights from our own research, but first I would like to raise the next question to Friedrich. You know, research has always benefited from the availability of benchmarking data. You know, a great example is our host, Times Higher Education, with the World University Rankings, the Impact Rankings. But in assessing teaching and learning online, how can universities be informed on what is happening in other institutions? What is GLC's view on that?
Yeah. We were interested to see what is changing and what is changing even in the context of the different countries worldwide. And if you look worldwide, we have different situations. Like I know from my sabbatical at the University of Sydney that they quite often had hybrid lessons. So people came to the university for a couple of times and then continued in a remote way. From a more densely populated country like Germany, people always came to the university, had only face-to-face interaction, only face-to-face teaching and things like this. But with COVID, things are completely changing. In the beginning, quite often, it's just a lesson filmed and you see the teacher for 90 minutes giving a talk, which is not appropriate in the new way of learning. So things are changing, and yes, you mentioned I'm right now at the Fern University. Fern only stands at the German word for distance teaching university. So it's a different kind of teaching and learning, because now we have a lot of written material, short videos, graphics, and things like this. And we have a much better way to track what students are doing, to have real access to data. So at the distance teaching universities, of course, we are in a process of having this kind of teaching. And we see that universities are a little bit changing the way of teaching towards a better condition for learning. And with this change, we have better ways to assess what's going on. In detail, we can see how reading of a written lesson part is going on, in which sequence and things like this. So from that point of view, we are in a much better shape to assess the quality of all the aspects, the quality of the teaching material, the way it is digested, it is taken, it is used, and it's contributing to building up real knowledge. So this is going on, but this is a process right now going on, and it's a little bit different in the different cultural contexts, different countries, and different sites worldwide.
Thank you, Friedrich. Kate, about security. In our latest Microsoft Security Intelligence report, education has been by far the most affected industry, with 62 of all reported enterprise malware encounters in the last 30 days. Can you talk to us what this means to the university?
every university now has multiple perimeters. So in the olden days, we used to just put up a firewall and everything was safe behind the firewall and there was just the one perimeter to manage. And now the perimeter is your people. And necessarily now everybody is distributed, and in many cases they're all around the world, and you can't control the endpoints. So that means that now identity becomes the perimeter. And so it means that we need to see universities up their game with respect to things like introducing multi-factor authentication, bringing on board privileged access management. They need to redesign their networks so that they segment them to prevent traversing across. So the universities need to professionalize their cybersecurity activities. So up until now, universities were by default open, and that was their purpose. They were meant to be, institutions that were open to communication and conversation. But now we do need to secure our institutions, while at the same time providing safe mechanisms so that we can still be collegial across institutions. So that's the real challenge that universities have. How do we maintain our collegiality and our open communities of scholars, but how do we keep it all safe?
Thank you, Kate. Friedrich, what activities does GLC plan?
Yeah, actually, in connection with your last question, I guess it's important to exchange ideas, to exchange insights. It was never a problem to assess, yeah, your work on the science, on the research side. But in teaching, it's more different. So what we planned first is to have an event in the 3 time zones for 2 hours on November 19th, where we try to bring together the higher education leaders to discuss the findings from this leadership survey where I talked a little bit about before. And then this might be interesting to everybody joining us right now or listening to us. In 2021, we are planning to have a 1-week event in all time zones, which will be open to all institutions to discuss and present things they try to do, they reason about with respect to digital learnings. So everybody who is interested, institutions or persons or groups, joining us in doing this 1-week event in early 21 should refer to our website. You can find our website, Global Learning Council, and then you will get to it. And the contact team in Berlin will come in contact to you. So this should be something we are planning with a couple of groups, but which will be completely open to everybody who is interested. So it's just interesting for us to see if other groups, other institutions are interested to join us. So this is the first step. And of course, we are hoping, but cannot plan, to have a face-to-face meeting in Nairobi sometime maybe in the autumn of next year. We will see.
Thank you, Friedrich. That's very exciting to be planned. Closing, Kate, would love to give the floor back to you. You've worked in several positions in public and private sector. Can you tell us what a few practices that universities can adopt to become more agile?
I'm really working to build DevOps capability in my team. I've worked in an agile manner since about 2004, and I genuinely believe that failing in a 2-week chunk is much better than failing in a 2-year chunk, and that really close engagement of the business as product owners is so essential. So we're doing it in my team. We're starting to build up that capability across IT, and it'll gradually start to roll out across our organization. I think that's probably the best way. It gets us closer to our customers, and it ensures that what we're doing stays in close alignment.
That's a great segue. Failing in 2 weeks is much better than failing in 2 years. Kate, Friedrich, has been a pleasure. Thank you very much for the conversation. Kate, what are your key priorities for the coming academic year in Australia, which starts right after the new year?
Well, it's all about change and disruption for the whole higher education sector next year. Everybody is starting to think about how we're going to bring students back to campus, how we're going to have hybrid models, because we've still got international students who can't get onshore. So it's all of those things, and it's going to be really challenging for the next couple of years, I think.
Thank you, Kate. Friedrich, I know you're very passionate about how to help institutions. What are one or two things that institutions can do to find out what other organizations are doing in this space?
Okay, that's a good question, because it directly refers what I mentioned before to our goal of the Global Learning Council. We are just trying to have an overview what's going on worldwide, and then to support communication. And that's probably the best thing we can do. Right now, we are facing more or less two phases. The first phase is just to get ready to use new technologies. But beyond that, after being familiar with the new technology, we have to do more to incorporate pedagogy and technology and the content. And one of the things we have to collaborate on, to exchange, to communicate on, is what we call personalized learning, because the new technology not only allows us to have a contact over distance, but to do much, much more.
Thank you, Friedrich. Kate, what I would like to ask you is, how can we maintain the privacy of the faculty and the students and still create a collaborative culture by sharing information with other organizations?
Well, anyone who knows the answer to that is doing very well. I think this is a constant challenge, and I alluded to in our chat about the need to sort out our identity problems. So we need to be able to collaborate with other colleagues in other institutions as if they're inside our own institution, so that we can maintain our security protocols and stuff while still having the active collaboration. And that's something that we're working very hard on at the moment.
Thank you, Kate. Friedrich, back to you. What collaborations do you plan for the next few months?
Yes, and at the one hand, we plan collaborations on the national side, but due to our overall goal of the Global Learning Council, we have, and I mentioned this before, we have a couple of events you will see on our website, the Global Learning Council website, where we have contributions from all areas, time zones actually, from east to west, from west to east, however you count it. And we want to exchange ideas, because the commercial situation and the economic situation in different countries are quite different. And additionally, and Kate was alluding to it, the laws are quite different in terms of keep privacy or not. In Germany, we have a strong privacy regulation. In the US, it's less strict. So we have different aspects to do. And there are two lines. One is the research line. We can keep privacy because we are using data only for the research purpose. But whenever we are in the regular use of these, we have to find out how we can do it, to what degree it's transparent to the users, and things like that. So this this is just going on, and we will offer different ways to exchange this as it is announced on our website.
Thank you, Frederick. Kate, probably we are running out of time, but I would like to ask you, you have worked in several positions, both in public sector and private sector. So can you tell us about what practices can higher education adopt that can learn and benefit from the experience of the private sector?
I think that it's very much of a oneness now. There's no big separations between things. The bigger differences are between the heavily regulated industries like banking and the less heavily regulated. And higher education has typically been in the less regulated buckets. So we've not taken account of the traditional banking style practices that are very focused on security and privacy. And also in Australia, we've focused on maintaining privacy and security to our local jurisdiction. And I think the GDPR, the European data privacy legislation, has been really good for lifting everybody's game globally. So I think that's been a good thing. But having worked across the private sector, public sector and higher education, there's a lot of commonalities. And what we're seeing now, though, is a lot of universities are stepping up their game in the information security and cybersecurity space, simply because of the sheer volume of threat actors out there.
That's a great comment, and also very positive one is that higher education it's now closing the gap with the practices of other sectors, both in public and private. Kate, Friedrich, thank you very much for this conversation. It's a great topic, and we are all looking to benefit from your experience. Thank you very much.